So going back to Mr. Frankman, what he did was he began his journey by campaigning. He put in objections to the planning application that was ultimately made when Quadrilla sought to resume their operations, and then appeared before a planning inspector. In fact, I think at first instance he appeared before the local authority, Lancashire County Council, who were responsible for the determination of the application. So the application made by Quadrilla went first to Lancashire County Council. There was a process whereby they considered the application. There was a lot of a huge amount of community interest and objection. Having considered it, Lancashire refused the application. They then went to appeal, as most of you I'm sure know, you're entitled as a developer, as a private individual. If you put in a planning application, it's refused, you can then appeal to the Secretary of State. He appoints, or she appoints, depending on who it is at the time, a planning inspector, who then will come to the local town hall or local council offices and conduct a hearing or an inquiry. And in this case, it was an inquiry. It was attended by many barristers and solicitors, some QCs. Quadrilla employed a QC. I think so too possibly did Lancashire, but one of my colleagues who later worked with me on the Frackman case, a barrister called Estelle de Hon, she represented Friends of the Earth, who also were represented at the inquiry, and an inspector, a very good inspector, was appointed to consider the whole appeal. And that said, it wasn't her ultimate decision as to whether or not Quadrilla should be granted planning permission on appeal. She wrote a report having heard all the evidence, and that report was then submitted to the Secretary of State, who then made the decision. I think it was himself. I think it was possibly even Savage Abbott at the time. But anyway, it was made by the Secretary of State, and the recommendation in that case by the Inspector Wendy Mackay was grant planning permission, and the Secretary of State agreed with that recommendation. So I'm really just giving you this as an outline of how your case might go, wherever you might be, whether it's in the Isle of Wight or Dunsfold or elsewhere. The point about the inquiry process there, though, is having made objections at the first instance stage, before the local council making the decision, at the inquiry stage, then there's an opportunity for people to turn up and give evidence and explain their fears, perhaps quite how the particular development will impact on their daily lives, and more generally, express concerns about, for example, and Lorraine just mentioned it, an issue which is really perhaps much more in everybody's focus as a result of the recent protest work by Extinction Rebellion. That's climate change. And I think that the more that people like yourselves express concern about the impact of climate change on fossil fuel development, the better. And looking around the room, most of us are a little bit older than perhaps 40 or 50, dare I say it. So we're really going to be concerned more about our children and our grandchildren. And I think it's just so important that we understand, but also express the point that our kids and our grandchildren are going to have to, that they won't have any option when it comes to how they live their lives. They're going to have to think about keeping out of the sun, keeping indoors, turning the lights off. They're going to have to cope with all those extreme weather events that we see predicted, by the the IPCC in their recent report on the impacts of anything more than a 1.5 degree increase in temperature. They're catastrophic events that we're talking about. The rise in sea level, it may not affect those of us in this area, but it's going to affect those in the, in the east of England and in the lower lying areas down in the south and over in Somerset and so forth. In terms of the increase in precipitation and rainfall, those areas that flood now are going to just continue to be flooded and to a greater extent. And there's a recent report. I mean, you only have to, every day you look in the papers, you see another report. And the last one I read, I think, or saw reference to, was talking about how many homes in Britain are now going to be unviable as a result of climate change. They won't be insured. You won't be able to get insurance for these homes. And so people are going to have to move wholesale. And that's just in the UK. And if you think about the impact on countries where people are more vulnerable to climate change, then we've really got to wake up. And the sooner that people like yourselves, who are perhaps mature and understand the position, make those points to decision makers, the sooner they're going to start waking up to the issue and becoming braver in the decisions that they make. Because I think at the moment, the decision makers, and I'm talking about planning inspectors, the Secretary of State, obviously members of the government ministers themselves, they're all still very concerned about the power of the fossil fuel developers, the fossil fuel companies. I hate to say they're in hock with them, but they the norm is, and it has been for years. These companies are ensuring our future. Well, actually, they're not. They're not doing that at all. I mean, and it's madness, I would suggest, to continue enabling them to dig up and mine for, whether it be gas or oil or any other, coal in particular, obviously, but other fossil fuels, when we know that is a road to disaster.